Good morning, Cody. He's going to be a year.
Yeah. Hi, Cody.
Hi, your friends. Yeah, we're going to get insurance through them. Yes, we are. Because
that's awesome. That's a great commercial with the dog.
Yeah, I know, but we know.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Today is Friday, the 26th of February. Al, let's get
let's start. Okay, everybody.
We're ringing the bell here too.
Everybody ring a bell. That's awesome.
Okay, we're on.
Now somebody kiss.
Today we have our guest speaker is George Veitengruber from Veitengruber Law. He is a real estate bankruptcy lawyer, and he's also going to talk about the importance of having a will. So George, whenever you're ready.
So thanks for having me, guys. I am, in fact, the man behind the curtain that Ivy's been talking about for years. And every once in a while, she reminds me and reminds you that I actually do exist. So if she says who George Veitengruber is now, just take a screenshot of this and you can finally confirm there is proof of life. I was about to try to do something silly. And for sharing dogs, there's mine. Griffey.
Oh.
There he is.
He a greyhound?
He is, in fact, a greyhound. He is turning 3 next month. He was trained in Kansas, but fortunately for him, he was determined not to be fast enough. So they flunked him out of racing school when he was about 14 months old. And he has been home with us almost ever since. As greyhound racing becomes a thing that is being phased out across the country, there are more dogs in the training routine than will ever be needed on the track. So therefore, sometimes we just get these guys even earlier. He is a handsome, easy devil that acts as the best 70-pound weighted heated blanket you have ever had. And every night insists on sleeping on one of our legs. He will manacle you to a bed. So that is a strange jump off point, but that is my fun fact. I've been involved with greyhound rescue for the last 15 years. Griffin is my 4th greyhound we've had, and my family has adopted 8 greyhounds over that period of time. Wow. I always apologize and feel bad, but I know I've left you in amazing hands with Ivy. Right now, we are demonstrating a fascinating lesson in multitasking and appropriate representation, because my BNI meeting has been on Fridays for 11 years, which is why I'm there and she's here. But yesterday, she reminded me that I was speaking today, and I said, well, that's great, but I still have to be at my BNI meeting. So I stayed at BNI until 7:58, and magically my sub appeared at 7:58 to finish the last 30 minutes of that meeting, so I could be here. In a world before Zoom, none of that would have been possible, but here we go. I have been running my own practice for the last 11 years. My office is in Wall, right off 34, across from the airport. And I have affiliate satellite offices in Bordentown and Metuchen. That amount of commuting has been something I've done for my entire life. So my mindset is, if I can drive 45 minutes in a triangle, and that's going to get people to get past the barrier of using me for geographical concerns, so be it. We like to talk about BC and AC. We don't know what AC is yet, but before COVID, we were servicing 450 clients a year. In 2019, about 200 of those clients were related to real estate, 200 were related to bankruptcy, and the other 50 involved foreclosure defense, which obviously has been slowing down as we pulled out of the last recession, and some wills and trusts. Now that we are looking towards a world called AC, not that we are there yet, but after COVID, we've seen a massive spike in real estate in 2020, and we did 250 transactions in real estate last year. but our bankruptcy shrunk to about 100, and our foreclosure shrunk to about 20, but our wills climbed up to about 50. Can anybody figure out why?
Mhm.
I see nodding heads.
Mhm.
Real estate was crazy last year because interest rates have never been lower, and people realized that they didn't like being in dense populated areas, so they were looking for more space. And the good people of New York decided to come to Jersey City and Hoboken and all of these northern areas. And then those people who were cashing out on these crazy people buying their properties for $100,000 over ask moved from Jersey City down to Monmouth County. Some realized that their jobs were not going to require them to come in. So some of those people moved all the way down to, you know, Brick, Bayville. The further south they could get, the more they could get. And that meant we had massive competition for a shrunken market. Part of the reason the market was shrunk was we didn't have sheriff sales since March of 2020. We have now gone a full calendar year where there has been less than 10% of the sales volume we had the year before. That's really good for people that are in crisis and don't know what to do next. But it's really bad for people that are in crisis that don't take the opportunity to plan before the crisis returns. We used to send out 2,000 postcards a month to about 10 counties, telling people there was an option to save their house before they let it go to sale. Last year, that 2,000 literally shrunk to less than 100 per month. Good thing for people that were in crisis. Bad thing for an attorney that this is what he did. So last year, very early in this pandemic, I was touched by the issue of, I had a client who closed on his house on March 2nd. And I'm sure everybody here remembers March 13th was the last working business day before the governor came on and said schools are going virtual and we're going to do a temporary shutdown. And everybody felt super inconvenienced and figured by the end of spring break, we'd be back to whatever the hell normal is. And 12 months later, here we are. My client that closed on the 2nd started feeling really ill by the 20th and was in the hospital from the 20th and found himself on a vent before the end of March. And he had passed away by mid-April. He was 32 and had no underlying conditions. 32, just bought his own house, left behind 3 children. So my office really took the idea of social distancing and masking very, very, very seriously. And we're still sitting in a hybrid model now where most attorneys have gone back to a very normal program. I have told my staff that we're going to do everything we can to work through this new format. And as a result, the only person, there's 2 of us that are in full time, and that's me because it has my name on the door, and the real estate paralegal because she's never been crazier or busier. But the rest of my staff have come to about a 2-day-a-week format where they work online, they work from home the rest of the time. We've set up all of our technology to make that easier. And then they spend 2 days physically in the office just to be connected to the practice. That was last April that all of that went on with my client. And now I'm going to fast forward because everybody has had a weird year and everybody's version of what they had to do during the COVID times makes it a little bit different. Some people have been able to just go business as usual. Some people, crazy things like, get married and then leave their wife in a separate country. And, someday, Tamer, I haven't talked to you in a couple of months. I hope we found a way to reunite finally. But I know it's been such a strange thing and what a fascinating story. In our case, just as everybody started to look to what comes next and how do we work through 2021, hoping that we'd all be able to go back to some form of social connectivity. On New Year's Eve, my parents called me and said, all right, well, we have COVID. And your first thing is shock and confusion, and shock and confusion turned into a little bit of anger and fear. Oh my God, I had just seen my parents on Christmas Eve. What if we have it? We all have to go get our tests. What do we do about the kids? Everybody came back with negative tests except my parents. And it turns out we eventually sourced it. So forgive me as I say something bad, dumb, wrong-headed about my mother, who many of you may or may not have known. She was the mayor of Howell in 1991 and was heavily involved in Monmouth County politics her whole life. But my mother is a statistical casualty because she elected to go shopping in a grocery store, or she elected to have a girls' trip down to Cape May, went into a bunch of stores and went to a restaurant. Those are the only two places where she could have gotten this, because the rest of the time she actually was isolating. So is my father. So New Year's Eve, we get this call. The night of New Year's Eve, my mother finds herself in the hospital because she fell on the way to the bathroom, hit her head, and went unconscious. On New Year's Day, she had the presence of mind to appoint my sister to act as a medical representative because my father had COVID too. That night she went on a vent. 20 days later, my mother never made it off the vent and she had passed away. During the first 4 days of that, my father was sent home because there are not enough beds for people that have COVID that are well. You're the walking wounded. But over those 4 days, we forced him onto a 24-hour-a-day Zoom call with my sister and I, gave him a pulse oximeter, gave him a temperature gun, and made him do regular screenings. His pulse ox dropped to 89 by day 4. So got him on a telehealth call. His physician said, you haven't been below a 95 in the last 3 years. You have to go back. So now my father goes into the hospital with double pneumonia and COVID. They put him on oxygen support, and he goes from somebody who was suddenly having like memory loss and difficulty grasping common words because of oxygen deprivation to bouncing right back. And God bless him, strong German stock. 7 days later, he is back home and he is relatively fine, right? Guy recovering from pneumonia, but relatively fine. My father now tells people he is so glad that we were pains in the ass to him because he would have slept it off, stayed on his couch, ate some Ritz crackers, drank some ginger ale, and thought it was just a normal cold. And it's most likely he just would have gone to sleep and not waken up. That's how close it was. All of this ties into the message that I had today. My parents were certain that they had wills and powers of attorney in place. And it turns out they did, in fact, have a will, but it is now a month since my mother passed, and they have absolutely no idea where the original is. They don't know where they put it. They didn't store it anywhere certain. I love the attorney. I've known him for most of my life, but for some reason, his office doesn't have certified true copies of the wills that were prepared. So if we had to go to court, this would have sucked. Unfortunately, we don't have to go to court because of how everything else was structured, but we would have added an extra layer of invasive practice to a difficult situation already. And now I'm going to highlight the documents that really matter at the moment. A will is something where when you write out a will, you are giving people direction as to how you want things divvied up, what you want satisfied, who you want remembered. If you don't write a will, the state has already written one for you. Having no will means you die intestate and the state divides your assets based on their formula. Now your surviving spouse gets a percentage, your children get a percentage. Super confusing and weird. And most people get a little overwhelmed by it. But at the same time, most people, unfortunately, hit a position and are like, well, I don't have much and my kids kind of know what we're supposed to do. And if I write one of those, I have to think about uncomfortable things. I'm telling you to take 5 minutes and think about uncomfortable things because we never know when it's our time. My mother was 71. She had a lot more to give. And unfortunately, she didn't have the time because she didn't know it. None of us expect to be in a car crash, but we like to have a plan in our head in case we are. In this case, the power of attorney and the advance directive that my parents also insisted they had filled out, turns out they didn't. My father had a advance directive in place that he couldn't tell us about until after he came out of the hospital. And that was when he had knee surgery done 2 years ago. So the only person who had that was the specialist that worked on his knee. His primary doctor didn't know about it. That's pretty silly. This becomes the making sure your doctors are aware of things you put together. But he did insist that they had them. So we scurried around the house looking for these documents. The reason we want a power of attorney in place is when we are not cognitive, when we are put in a coma, who makes decisions for you? Everybody here might be able to look to the left, look to the right and say, well, I have a spouse for that. Well, I just laid out a scenario for you when your spouse is incapacitated too. Now who makes the decision? If my mother had not put my sister down verbally for the medical information, we would have had to go to court to deal with this. We would have had to appoint somebody to make those decisions. That's invasive, that takes time. If we had had to do that, instead of being able to let her go away, go away is the wrong word, let my mother die with dignity, we would have had to wait for a court to give us approval to take her off the ventilator. We would have kept alive a corpse because we didn't have the legal authority to do it. It is a simple document. And when we do this document, it is, here's who's going to make my decisions. And if that person's not available, here's the next one. And if that person's not available, here's the next one. We always put 3 people in there. God forbid your spouse is in the same spot you are. God forbid you're traveling together and you're both knocked into a coma at the same time. That's why we want kids, family, friend, whoever to make decisions for you. And then the next part is the breadcrumbs as to how you want to be treated while you were in this state of incapacity. Before COVID, most people didn't think much about this. They would be like, well, if they have to induce me into a coma, you know, keep me around for 45 days and then it is what it is. In this case, COVID is such an invasive beast that that's a long, long time to linger and maybe, most likely, not make it through. There is no reason that your family should have to go through such an ordeal and guess as to what you would want just because you didn't take 10 minutes to fill out a questionnaire and manifest what your intentions are. That's the devastating part. But I'll pivot it the other way for a second too, right? My father has a DNR, and I didn't know that, but now I do because I've seen the document. Well, very, very often dealing with COVID, if it goes bad, there's going to be a point when your heart might stop, but it also doesn't mean that it's over. It just meant that you hit a really critical moment and they could still pull you out of it. But if you had written a DNR and your doctors had it, you're done. So you actually have to have the uncomfortable conversation now and say, do you understand what you are asking? Do you understand what it means? And a year ago, nobody would have. Everyone would have had an abstract idea of it. But we have never seen something so devastating rip through our country than this. And because of COVID, these uncomfortable conversations have to now happen just so everyone's on the same page about what you really, really want. Difficult, dark, but necessary. Because if you don't make those decisions you're leaving the decision making to your spouse, your children, doctors, just to guess what you actually want. And that's putting a really unfair burden on other people. I'd like to figure a way to make this conversation less dark. Yeah. So my mother had this entire life of philanthropy and give back. And I think that's your silver lining piece to this, is that if you understand that we all will ultimately have one guarantee, and that is we will die. It's just, is it today, tomorrow, 50 years from now? What is the legacy that we're going to leave behind with that time? And as her son, I think I took for granted all of the cool, weird little things that my mother had done over the years, because when you grow up giving back to the community, you just think that's what everybody's supposed to do. There's videos out there. We were covered by Governor Murphy as one of the COVID spotlights. That was pretty weird and amazing and overwhelming that the governor takes time out of his schedule to talk to you. We had the police of Howell Township all come out in military dress, provided a police escort, and answered the very strange question of, if you're going to have a mass and you need 6 pallbearers, how do you do that when you only have 4 adults attend the ceremony? The Howell police, including the chief, acted as pallbearers for my mother's funeral, provided a military escort, had their entire squad out, and flag at half staff as the hearse passed by headquarters for the last time. All because over the course of the last 30 plus years, not only did she help with all of their fundraisers and attend them and bring a bunch of gifts to it, but she helped them in contract negotiations. She helped them raise money to get bulletproof vests before there was a budgetary item for it. She gave to them as much as she possibly could. And in the next month or two, there's going to be an announcement that they're creating an annual senior citizen food drive, because the other thing she had done for the better part of the last 2 decades was set up Passover and Thanksgiving meals for homebound senior citizens, to make sure that they weren't forgotten for the holiday. Anybody that has had to sit through a wake or sit Shiva knows how much food gets thrown on you when somebody passes. In the age of COVID, we had 3 households getting that same amount of food with nobody coming to visit. It was an amazing, overwhelming experience of way too much food. And I called it the revenge of the chicken parm, because on one day, my sister got 3 trays of chicken parm from 3 different families. And I laughed at her until the next day, the same exact thing happened to me. By Saturday, we had enough food to feed an army. And there were 1 person in my father's house, 5 people in my sister's house, 4 people in my house. So I did exactly what my mother would have done. And I called the priest of the local church and I said, I'm in trouble. I have too much food. And he came down and portioned out that food and fed people that otherwise would not have had a warm meal. And that way I didn't have to tell any of my friends, please stop sending me food, because I know sending things when you feel helpless is important, but rejecting it would have made them feel horrible. So instead, from the grave, my mother figured out how to feed people for one last time. And the people in Howell have said they don't want that to be the last time either. So they're trying to set up an annual drive in her name. All of this is a crazy, long, drawn out way of saying, when we have decisions to make legally, Veitengruber Law is here to be your resource. We are an amazing outlet of insanely intelligent, compassionate people. My people love their job. I create a fun loving pirate ship and say it's all going to work out, no matter how weird and dark and scary it is. We're going to solve it. That goes for standard everyday vanilla real estate transactions, as well as dumpster fire short sales with liens and missing spouses and more judgments than you know what to do with. I try to bring control to the complicated. I try to break it into English so that no one has to be overwhelmed. And my conversations with people often go like this, with the extra color of this is the most time I've probably talked on a Zoom call without cursing. That's fascinating and amazing for me. Don't ask why I'm not cursing this morning, because I really don't fucking know. There it is. But I find that if you can talk to people like people instead of pretend to be an attorney, they open up more and they can be comfortable with you. And that comfort creates the deeper connectivity and relationship that we want, not just from our clients, but from business. I don't care about one transaction. I am not here for a smash and grab of use me because I'm really good. I am here because I care about your businesses and I care about how we can connect on a deeper level to worry about transactions for the next 30 years and create that legacy of working together. Everybody here loves Ivy. That doesn't mean you should love me, but I'm really good at hiring people that have amazing, warm, passionate personalities. So that means I have good taste. I just have a foul mouth. I hope you all appreciate that we care because it's important to not just help the person sitting in front of us, but to help their communities when we're dealing with it. Somebody losing their house often gives up on their house. So the person that has abandoned their home has taken their community and devalued it because it now is boarded up or it looks run down and is falling apart. If they take 10 minutes and talk to me about their options, they will realize A, they can save it, or B, if they don't care about saving it, they can at least leave with dignity and control. And that's really what I do, is I restore control in a lot of situations, whether it be we need a bankruptcy to strip out this debt so your budget can get back under control. We need to put in a loan modification so you can start paying your mortgage after 2 years of joblessness has ended. We need to write a will so your kids don't have to make choices for you. Or we have to improve this real estate offer by $10,000, or we have to make this $10,000 repair because it's the only way we go forward. In English, my job is to take complicated, weird, quirky legal aspects and turn them into bite-sized English that my clients can learn to control. And I'm pretty good at it. I have no idea how long I'm supposed to talk, so I'm going to shut up now.
That's all right, George. I thank you for this powerful presentation, or it wasn't a presentation, you were talking life. And thank you for sharing that. If we were together, you know I'd give you a big bear hug right now.
And if you gave me a big bear hug, I'd say, put your damn mask on.
I would have one on, don't worry. So I know we only have, we're short on time, but if anybody has any questions for George, now's the time to ask before we go around the room for 30-second introductions. Any questions, comments, anybody? Bonnie?
George, you talked on a topic that is, it's a tough topic, thank you, but you put it in perspective. So it's 3 documents, a power of attorney, a medical directive, and a will, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. What is the average cost factor to do those 3 documents?
It's a flat fee and it's usually $1,000. And I started yelling at people a year ago at this time and saying, I care much less about the money than the documents being in place. And I do payment plans. I don't care. The money's nice so I can keep my business open, but you having the documents is more important than me having all the money in my pocket.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Mark?
If you want to find a bright side to this, George, first, great presentation, very moving, very, very important. I can tell you after 31 and a half years of marriage, Jerry and I has finally got all those ducks in a line. And I got to tell you, when it's done, you actually feel more at peace with the world around you. You know, it's really uncomfortable up to that point. I got to tell you, by the time we were done signing and everything was done, I'm like, you actually breathe a little easier moving forward with your life. So that's a positive out of all this too.
Absolutely.
Erika, did you raise your hand?
I did. I just, George, thank you so much for sharing that heartfelt. I mean, I know you had a very captive audience, because I think all of us were thinking about when we've either have been in that situation or what could have happened with our families. And thank you for sharing. And I think it really highlights, not only getting your legals, but all your personal affairs in order. And I'm sure Tamer's going to talk about, make sure you have life insurance to protect against this. Stuff happens unexpectedly. Make sure you have your finances in order and they're placed in the way that you want them, protecting your family, not only with the directives, but the protections as well. But it really highlights that, COVID has provided or really awakened people to know that, yes, unexpected things can happen and I need to be prepared. And they're not easy conversations, but just to do them, talk to somebody, and just have that legal professional advice to make sure that you're protected.
Yeah. And frankly, we didn't get into the aspect of life insurance, but I'm a massive believer in it. And it's because somebody educated me at the very beginning of my own business. I've had whole life insurance for the last 11 years, as has my wife, but my kids have policies. And when you first hear that, you go, wait, what the hell? Why would you do that? Until you realize that whole life policies are just another excuse to save money and to pay for college someday. So my kids have had policies since they were 2 years old. And it was a forced way to save for retirement before I had the extra money to throw towards the SEP and now the 401k. These things are there for emergencies. And I've had, forget COVID. Let's go back to the simple days when we used to say fuck cancer instead of say fuck COVID. One of my friends just lost his wife after an 8-year battle with cancer. And I had a long conversation with him the other day because they were in foreclosure because of the crushing medical bills. They were spending $4,000 a month out of pocket for every experimental thing she needed. Now that she's passed, his budget got better, which is a little morbid, but there was a life insurance policy that paid off the house. That's insanely important because if you've just paid off the house, you've left behind something that your family can rely on to make sure that they can figure out how to go forward without you, emotionally trying to figure it out, but financially not being overwhelmed that they have to figure that out too. So get life insurance. Don't think of it as a way to fund your spouse's future Miami house and her young boy toy, which is what I worry about. But worry about, is this what's going to make sure my kids have the money to go to college and to have a stable home life now that I've suddenly passed? Soapbox over again, sorry.
George, how often do you recommend that somebody review and update their will after they initially get one done?
I believe it should be, no matter what, should be done every 3 to 5 years, even if it's just to look at it and say, hey, you're good. You do not have to update the documents every time. If you've got simple changes, I'm no longer talking to my sister. I don't want her to be my backup. She will pull the plug on me. You do something called a codicil. You write a 1-paragraph addendum and say, please change paragraph 2 to reflect that it's no longer my sister making choices, but it's my mailman. It's a bad idea. But, you know, there's a good chance that if you do something like that, it doesn't cost much. I think we charge people $250 just to do a quick update. And that's more or less the administrative time that goes into it. We tell people, get these documents when there is a significant change in life. You got married, you had kids, you bought a house, you have your first real asset. But I realize everybody here now in the COVID times may actually be more present of mind to it. But I'm just as sincere of a hypocrite as everyone here. I put my wills and my power of attorney together the day before I had bariatric surgery. And it was because that 0.0001% chance of dying was enough that I didn't want my wife struggling to A, know where all the money was buried, and B, know what I needed done, right? So when a life change is about to hit you, take care of the documents. When a life change happens after you've done the documents, call your attorney and say, hey, can you look these over and tell me if I need to fix anything? I don't want your money that bad. I know that sounds weird, but I only want to give you good advice. And if the documents look great, I'm going to tell you to keep them.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, George. This was a very powerful and much needed discussion. Thank you for sharing your personal story that was very impactful to all of us. We appreciate it very much.
Thanks for having me. Really, I'll throw my info in the chat. By all means, if you guys just want to talk about anything, I'm giving you my cell. I'm always here. And thank you for having me today.
Thank you very much.